Well, I wrote Brand and Talent because the world's getting a lot more complex, and that in the old world, you had brand people who were really all about external communications, building brand strength. And then you had HR people and internal comms people and employee engagement people who were all about finding the right talent, engaging that talent, getting that talent motivated to deliver results. But never the twain met. Those two things never really worked that closely together. So brand and talent is all about a new way of making sure that in this new complex world, those two functions, those two agendas can actually be wrapped into one. You still need the expertise in each, but brand and talent is all about making them work together a lot more simply, a lot more clearly, so you get more benefit out of it. Well, really the first thing is that they need to agree a common language, that two different worlds have evolved around brand terminology and HR terminology, and that language is still important for the practitioners. But when they're not talking inside their silo, they need to come up with a new way of looking at things. So my book, Brand and Talent, talks about let's get rid of all the confusing language that has a lot of baggage with it, really. And let's actually just think about four things. Let's talk about purpose. So get both the marketing and brand people to agree and the HR and internal communications people to agree. What's the purpose of the business? Get the leadership team to actually ask the tough question. Why do we exist? Why would the world be a poorer place if we disappeared tomorrow? Then get them to think about, all right, well, if that's our purpose, what's our ambition? What's that mountain we want to climb? What are the results we want to produce? When will we know we've produced them? Will we ever get there? Get them to connect that to the purpose, and you've suddenly got the makings of a very good story. Then you need to connect it to your strategy. You need to make sure that the brand strategy and the people strategy are actually both pointed in the same direction, so you've got a plan of action to build that customer loyalty on one side and build employee engagement on the other. That leads you to the conversation about brand, which is about how do we then position that purpose, position that ambition, and describe that strategy and execute that strategy in a way that's appropriate, that's distinctive, and that's compelling in the marketplace. Again, the whole idea is that these things don't exist in isolation. And traditionally, businesses have tried to manage them in isolation. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. It's a lot more transparent. There are many more media channels, that your customer might actually now be a potential employee. They might actually be a supplier. So that all those lines have blurred to such a degree that the two things, brand management and talent management, really need to be looked at in the same light, as the same thing, and ultimately as one discipline requiring two different skill sets to deliver. Well, the first step that an organization needs to take if they want to take the model that I put forward in Brand and Talent is actually acknowledge that they might need to have a conversation that's a slightly different kind of conversation. The first thing is they need to agree what's their purpose. And you'd be surprised how many organizations think they have a purpose. They think they've written it down and documented it. But in my experience, more often than not, they actually haven't. So the first step is get everybody around the table as a leadership team. Involve your employees if you can, but really get real clarity around what's the purpose of the organization. That actually can provide a really fundamental filter that will help drive decision making for all the functions, whether they're brand related, whether they're operational, whether they're HR related, whether they're communications related. So getting that clarity around purpose and then that additional clarity around ambition helps you shape a great strategy, a clear strategy, a simple strategy. So the whole premise behind Brand and Talent is that it should give you a really good filter to make better decisions, who you should hire, who you should not hire, who you should retain, who you should promote, but also what markets should you enter, what markets should you not enter, what products and services should you provide to your marketplace, what should your service delivery look like from the client's point of view or the customer's point of view, but also from the employee's point of view. So really the pragmatic advice I would give is start with a conversation about nailing down that purpose, that ambition, so it informs a strategy that then allows you to maximize what you get out of brand and what you get out of your talent assets. The book focuses a lot on purpose for a very simple reason, that when you look at organizational performance over time, there's a heap of data that show that organizations that have a strong sense of purpose outperform organizations that don't. So if you just focus on making profit, you actually generate less profit. If you focus on something bigger, profit comes as a byproduct. I got really interested in this, and so I started thinking about, well, where does that profit come from? How do you manage an organization that's driven by purpose? And I thought, well, really, it comes down to two things. One is, how do you build customer loyalty? How do you build brand strength? So there's a brand side to it. But then a brand doesn't exist without the people behind it, the people who are inventing the brand, the people who are delivering the brand. So the second angle you have to play with is employee engagement. Who do you hire? Who do you not hire? How do you make sure that when you do hire, that it's the right kind of experience you're providing, that after they've joined the organization, that they're engaged and enthusiastic and as empowered and productive as they can be. So I ended up having these two big ideas, one about brand, and there are lots of books about brand, and one about talent, and there are lots of books about internal communications and HR and employee engagement. But there's really not a book about how the two actually are intertwined. So the book talks about purpose, because purpose is so essential to driving great organizational performance. But how do you do that? Well, you've got to do it through brand, and you've got to do it through your talent management. So the two things together are what really, really make a huge difference to organizations that want to be really superb. Well, the biggest obstacle to implementing what I say in the book around brand and talent is really old thinking and organizational silos. So organizational silos, they do exist for a purpose. You need to break up work into component elements that make sense. But what the book is really about, and what the biggest obstacle I've faced in helping clients overcome this, is how do you get silos to stop thinking in the kind of deep technical transactional way that they work, and think about how do they elevate themselves above the silos so they're actually focused on a bigger organizational objective. So not just focusing on the technical aspects of their role, but thinking about the business, the objectives the business is trying to achieve. What's it trying to deliver? What's it trying to do? So brand and talent is really about how do you break down those silos, which in my experience is always the biggest challenge in a business. Who should read the book Brand and Talent? Well, I think, of course, everybody should read it, but really who? CEOs, chief executive officers, chief marketing officers, chief technology officers. So anybody who has a stake in the overall organizational outcome should read a book like this, because it gives them a cross-section about brand and talent rather than a deep technical dive. But just as importantly, I think there are probably three audiences who would benefit from it. The first would be heads of HR. So people who lead HR functions to kind of get a better picture about how brand can work with HR. The second one would be internal communications or corporate communications people. Because again, how do they get the organization to engage with and understand what a big purpose is and how to make it relevant, not just at the C-suite and the executive level, but relevant to every employee in the business. And then third, I think people who are in brand and marketing should read the book, because it gives them many of the tools they need to actually have a productive conversation with those other two stakeholders, the internal comms and the HR people. They can then understand that they can share an agenda, they can deliver value together, and hopefully by reading the book, break down those silos that I've talked about.